I'm Dr. Soma Mandal, and welcome back to the show. Today, I'm joined by Beatty Carmichael, entrepreneur and author of The Prayer of Freedom. He's spent years helping people find healing through faith, forgiveness, and spiritual renewal. Let's dive into his journey and how spiritual healing can transform our health and emotional well-being. The questions I had for you were leaning towards a little different, and you reached back and said, hey, my focus is different. And so I'm curious now as to how you shifted your business growth to healing and freedom, and tell us about what the prayer of freedom is and what kind of change you believe it enables for people like myself and everyone else.
Sure. Been in business for 25 years. My business is in marketing. And the last 12 or 13 years now, we've been helping real estate agents in the United States generate listings. So it's a company called Agent Dominator. And it has nothing to do with the topic of the prayer of freedom and helping people gain healing. But what happened is about 9 or 10 years ago, right in there, God started to lead me in a direction to want to go pray for people. Kind of this burden in my heart said, pray for people for healing. And it was October 2016 when I started, and God healed. And I'll define healing since I know you're in the medical side of things. So this is a good discussion on what is healed and what is not. But God healed about a third of the people I prayed for. And then within a year, about 90% of the people I was praying for were being healed. So I'm running my business, and then I'm going out on the weekends, going out to Walmart, just walking up to people, say, hey, I'm out praying for people. Do you need healing for anything? And it was a very interesting time because I didn't understand what was going on. I actually come from 7 generations of medical doctors, which I think you found in your research on me. My dad was one of the top vascular surgeons in the United States, or probably technically the world. My grandfather retired from medical practice at 85. My father-in-law, he's deceased now by about 24, 25 years, but he was an internist for 50 years.
Okay.
So a lot of medical sides. So let me address what does healing mean for our medical compatriots out there. For me, when I say someone is healed, it simply means that all of the symptoms that they were experiencing have completely disappeared.
Okay.
It does not mean that they've gone to the doctor and the doctor has run tests and diagnostics and said, you are healed. It simply means that, like if their knee was in a lot of pain and has been for years, and I pray for them, and now the knee is not in pain, I would say the knee was healed. When I pray for glaucoma, when I pray for deaf ears, when I pray for sciatica and degenerative disc disease and fibromyalgia and arthritis, and all of those symptoms disappear, the eyes open up, the ears open up, they can hear. Like just 5 days ago, I actually just came back from Spain. My daughter lives in Spain, and she works with an outreach sort of organization there. And one of the visitors could barely hear. He was completely deaf in his left ear, and he had a hearing aid on his right ear because the right ear could barely hear. And as I was talking with them, I said, this feels like one of these, I call them spiritual torments. We'll talk about that. Just a spiritual issue. I think I can help you get your ears working again. Would you like me to guide you through this? So in about 20 minutes, 15 or 20 minutes, as I guided him through, and you would click each ear, all of a sudden he starts hearing in his left ear, which was totally deaf. There was an explosion about 10 years ago, and it totally blew his eardrums out. And now he could hear, and he could hear better in his left ear than his right ear. Then he takes out his hearing aid, and we continue this process, and both ears continue to improve. Within about 15 or 20 minutes, he could hear normally again. So I would call that his deaf ears were healed. That's the way I define it. It's just the symptoms have disappeared. Then I started to get more passionate about helping people change their lives with things that have been plaguing them for years. Doctors say there's no cure, just live with it. And I'm finding that there's a pathway that you can actually reverse what's happened by treating it as a spiritual issue rather than a physical or mental issue like most medicine does. It just became more rewarding to go help people change their lives than to help people make money. We still help people make money in the business side, but God has directed me to really no longer focus my efforts in that direction. I'm still actively involved with our customers, but my efforts in what I really do is focus in this that we're going to be talking about today.
And what led you to do this? You said that God led you to do that. How did that manifest? Was it a realization?
Yeah,
Was it a feeling? How did you make that realization for yourself?
that's a really good question. What happened was I ran across a documentary series. It was a 3-part series, like an hour and a half each, on what God was doing today in people's lives. And I grew up in the church, but it was a very legalistic church background, and I thought everything was normal. And then I realized this isn't a good spot to be in for me. And in that church, they believe that these things no longer happened, that no longer can someone pray for somebody and God would intervene and heal. And what these documentary series were is people going out into the public marketplace, finding someone on crutches or in a wheelchair or with a bandage on their wrist or whatever it was, and pray for them, and they were being healed. And it really grabbed me. And I think with my background, my whole family generational background for over 200 years being in healing, there's something probably in my DNA maybe, or my genetics that just says healing is what I'm wired to do. So that really caught my attention. I went to my church. They said, that doesn't happen. That's fake. I said, okay, I can't get any help there. And so I just started to explore things entirely on my own. And that's how I got caught up in it. I think here's probably the best way to describe it, Soma. I teach at an addiction recovery center for women. It's one of the largest ones in America. And when I work with those women and they have all kinds of issues, I don't know much about addiction, but addictions, it's not just you have an addiction and the rest of your life is normal. You usually have, if you have addictions, you have multiple addictions. You typically have all kinds of mental health issues and anxiety, bipolar disorder, depression. You have all kinds of chronic pain, all kinds of everything's, it's a cesspool of problems and challenges in their life. So when someone comes into the class and I have one of my past students share what this process did for them, then now all the students there are really hungry to want to learn how to do it for themselves because it really resonates. And I think that's what happened with me when I saw those videos, that documentary of those people going out praying for people, and in the Western world, we would call it miraculously healed, something that we cannot explain. And people who could not walk there in a wheelchair, now they're getting out of the wheelchair and walking normally. When I started to see that, it made me excited because realizing the impossible is possible. And I've always gravitated towards stuff like that.
Is this something that we can all do to help others? Or is there a process that we have to go through to learn how to pray for others? Can you walk us through that?
Let me share what my story is on that, because it answers your question, and it's both. What I was doing for the first 6.5, 7 years is something that very few people can do. God told me it was a gift. He called it a gift of healing. I gave you a gift to pray for people and they would be healed. And that's why 90% roughly of those I prayed for, whatever it was that they were dealing with, was being healed. Someone else could come and pray for them and they wouldn't be healed. I remember one pastor, I walked up to him, he was in Walmart, and said, "Hey, can I pray for you or anything?" He said, "Yeah, I've had a stroke. I lost most of the eyesight in my left eye and I can barely see out of it." He said, "I just came back from church and my entire prayer team prayed for an hour for me. Nothing happened." I said, "That's okay. It usually changes when I pray. Can I pray?" So I prayed for him and it instantly opened up. His vision restored by about 80%. So that is something that not anyone can do. It's like a selective gifting, if you call it that. But then it was about 3 years ago, I'd go out to Walmart once or twice a month on the weekends. And I was out at Walmart one weekend and I was 90% everyone I prayed for was being healed. And within 2 weeks, when I went back out, it was like almost no one was being healed. like it dropped to 10% thereabouts. And it really startled me. Imagine you go into your work. I think you mentioned you're an internist.
Yes.
Imagine you go in to the office and now you forgot everything about medicine. You haven't a clue what's going on. The startledness of what just happened. I used to be able to do this and now I can't. That's what happened with me. And I went to God and I just prayed and I said, what's going on? And he said in my heart, I don't want to say that I'm hearing this in my ears, but he said that he took my gift of healing away. And I said, why? And he said, because now I want you to learn to do it through by what he called authority, but an approach that anyone can do. So I started to take what I learned in some ancient religious texts on spiritual laws and healing. I went out and applied it by leading people into their own prayer to God, and I started seeing them being healed. So now what's happened is I wrote a book that he had directed me to write called The Prayer of Freedom. That's what you see back here on my shoulder. And it's basically 3 sections, how it works. Then there's 1 chapter that's a worksheet that you fill in the blanks with things going on that have gone on in your life. And then a prayer portion that you do all on your own.
Okay.
And then the rest of the book is how to maintain it, which answers some of the questions you sent me. We'll talk about that. So as far as, is this something that others can learn to do? And what's the process? The answer is yes. When I teach at the Addiction Recovery Center, my average class is about 20 students every 6 weeks. And I give each of them a copy of the book, and I tell them to go to chapter 12 and just do the worksheet and go through the prayer process entirely on their own. I don't guide them. I don't pray with them. They do it all on their own. And 87% of them, last time I did a statistical measurement of it, everything that they were dealing with in their life, almost all of it disappeared, with a few exceptions. 1 or 2 things might still remain. But their addictions for sex, alcohol, drugs, pornography, gone. Their chronic pain of fibromyalgia and arthritis and muscle pain, those type of things, gone. Their mental illnesses of anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, gone. The psychiatrist would take them off their meds because they don't need the psychiatric meds. Their relationship conflicts with their kids, always being fussy, all that would calm down. And there was just like this total shift in their lives. And they did it entirely on their own, just using the process that I laid out as a step-by-step process in my book, The Prayer of Freedom. So this is now something that people do on their own. There's an old saying that if you give a man a fish, you'll feed him for a day. But if you teach him how to fish, you'll feed him for a lifetime. And what this allows is, I didn't understand why God would take away a gift where I was able to make such an impact in people's lives. And now I realize it. For me, I could only affect maybe 100 people a year when I would go out and pray for people. But now, because it's systematized in the book, I can affect 1,000 people a year, millions a year, depending on how many people buy the book, because they can all do it on their own and it's no longer tied to me. And that is what excites me.
And how do you explain spiritually what happens to someone when it's healed? Do you think it's a psycho-spiritual thing that happens?
It's not psycho. Yeah.
When I say psycho, not in the that it's a placebo effect or anything like that. It's more of something happens within their brain, possibly within their being, which somehow spiritually affects them. How have you come to explain the healing that you've witnessed?
It's totally separate from the human. All right, let me see if I can bring it in medical terms. When I get a sinus infection, it's not my thinking that frees me from it. I go to the doctor, he'll give me a Z-Pack or something like that. I take it and my sinus infection disappears. It gets rid of the virus that's causing it. So what it is, it's a third party. It's a virus that's causing my body to be sick. When you get that third party out, then your body heals. So what happens spiritually is we live in there are 2 parts of us. There's a spiritual part. I call it the soul. The people may have a different word, but the soul is our mind, will, emotions, personality, but it exists in a different realm than I'll call it a spiritual realm. And then I have my body, and it exists in the earthly realm. So the things that we do in life we actually do a lot of these things unknowingly. It's actually occurring in the spiritual realm, but it affects the earthly realm. And when God created man, this is my understanding of how this works. God created man with a conscience. And in that conscience, it seems like God placed his standards of right and wrong. This is why when we go out and do something bad, a lot of times we feel guilty and no one had to tell us that we did it wrong. We know we hurt someone and we should not have done that. When we do something good, we feel good. And what happens is when we do things bad, it opens a door in the spiritual realm for some sort of a spiritual entity. You can call it a dark energy spirit. You can call it a darkness. You can call it a low frequency energy. You can call it a evil spirit. But there's something that happens in the spiritual realm that now manifests in our life. And it manifests as a physical issue. And then when you shut that door, you get that issue, that third party out, just like that virus. When the virus leaves, then your issue leaves. And so what this is a cause and effect. You mentioned that your family originally is from India. So you have karma. And karma says, I guess there's I don't understand it as much, but the two versions I understand is when you live a bad life, you come back the next life and you're going to have bad challenges. And then there's also my understanding that bad people, when you do bad things, will happen to you in this life. And when you do good things will happen to you. The question is why? How does doing something bad cause bad things to happen or good cause good things to happen? There has to be some sort of connection that's not in this physical world that's driving it. And that connection is in the spiritual world. And in that spiritual world, it's actually closing a door to a third-party entity that's in the spiritual realm. And when you shut that door, that entity leaves. And when it leaves, it takes everything with it. If you go to my website, I have a website for my book. For your video listeners, watchers, it's right above my head, theprayerofreedombook.com. But one of the things I have done on a lot of these shows is I have role-played and demonstrated this process with the host. And I put 4 of them on that website where you can watch in real time someone who's been dealing with a knee pain from football injury 20 years earlier. And within just a few minutes, all the pain is gone. The first time it's been gone in over 20 years. Someone else dealing with anxiety and depression, someone else with neuropathy in their legs. And in all of these cases, these are long-term chronic issues that have been very painful, very damaging to them, that has never dissipated over the years. And by following this simple method of simply closing that spiritual doorway that they had opened unknowingly years back, their pain disappears, their anxiety disappears, their depression disappears, whatever it is. And you can actually watch it in real time and see these guys' expression. They're blown away because one guy, his knee, he was a football player in the Canadian Football League. He had a microfracture in his knee and knocked him out of football, but it's been in pain ever since. On the show, the pain level was a 7. And then it goes down to a 0. And he's talking to me and he's standing up, he's moving all around, he's checking out that knee. He said, I can't believe it. The pain's gone. And he's actually a holistic healer. So he's tried everything that he's known to do. But what I've uncovered is that so many of these things just have a spiritual root, something in that spiritual realm where we violated God's standard in our conscience. And it opened a door for some sort of a third party.
I think you were mentioning that you work with people who suffer from addiction.
Yes.
And so their struggles have a spiritual root to them. Yes?
Yes.
And how do you safely help people identify those spiritual roots so that they can help themselves? And then obviously that you can help them as well. How do you do that?
So the safety is real easy. There's nothing that you put in your body with this and nothing that you do that's wrong. Literally the entire process. Let me walk you through it conceptually. So if we take the idea that these issues are when we violate God's standard of right and wrong, I've identified about 18 different categories of where we violate those standards. Let me give you the biggest one, unforgiveness. Someone's hurt you, and now you hold a grudge and bitterness against them. Simply by forgiving, the man I mentioned earlier that was deaf in his ears, the only thing he did is he forgave people, about 3 or 4 people, and his ears opened up. I was at Walmart another time, and this lady could not read. Her eyes were so blurry she couldn't even read the words on the page. And I asked if she had unforgiveness for anyone. She had it with an ex-boyfriend who grossly abused her, physical abuse and violently. And I asked if she would be willing to forgive him. She said yes. I led her into kind of a proper way to forgive someone where it closes those spiritual doors. And in 3 minutes, she could read the text of the book from 4 feet away. So I'm finding that something as simple as forgiving someone, there's no risk to do it. There's no red flags that you have to be worried about. Addictions are similar, Soma, is going through this worksheet of these 18 different categories, and it's just a memory jogger. Who do you hold a grudge against that you haven't forgiven? And you make a list. What type of, another one might be, have you done any activity in the occult? Have you played with a Ouija board? Have you tried to put a curse on someone? Anything like that. You make a list, okay? So all this is doing is making the list and then saying, God, I'm sorry, and I confess that it was wrong. So there's no risk to do that because you're not doing anything wrong. And with these people with addictions, they've been in and out of recovery centers multiple times. They've been in and out of prisons. Nothing has worked. They're desperate.
Yeah.
And so now this gives them an opportunity and they start to get free.
You talk about transformations. We mentioned addiction, anxiety, depression, and you mentioned another person who had obviously relationship conflicts, chronic pain. Where does this prayer of freedom not apply? Where most people who work in parallel with doctors or mental health practitioners, are there places where this does not apply?
A lot of places. So let me give you the characteristics of what to look for with this. Anytime you have something that's persistent and chronic in your life, then that is an area where it's most often, I find, a spiritual issue. Sleep apnea, that's persistent and chronic. Anxiety and depression, addictions, chronic pain, constant relationship conflict. Anytime you think that you've been jinxed because everything always gets destroyed in your life, that's where this most likely is going to help.
Okay.
Anytime something is acute, I've got a broken arm because I ran into a moving car, or I start to get the sinus infection and everyone around me is sick and I pick it up. Those type of things are usually just normal stuff. This is the best way to describe it. My father-in-law, the internist, he would always sit his patients down and say that health is based on 3 pillars. It's either mental, physical, or spiritual. He would ask you what your challenge is, and then he would just engage with you in conversation, and he's trying to figure out, is it a mental, a physical, or a spiritual issue? Because only a correct diagnosis will allow you to get rid of the problem. So what I'm done is most medical science now has removed the spiritual component, and they only talk about it's either mental or physical.
Right.
But there are a lot of things that aren't mental and physical, but they're spiritual. I'm just bringing the third leg of the stool back in, using a spiritual therapy that simply, for the average person, takes maybe an hour or 30 minutes, depending on kind of what's going on. And it's something they can do on their own, at home, with no risk of any kind, because you're not taking a pill or taking a shot or anything. It's simply making a list of things that God prompts you to put on that list, and then using a structured approach that says, I confess I was wrong. And if that's the source of this problem I'm having, will you take this problem away? And the problem starts to disappear. Acute issues, probably not this. Ongoing, persistent, chronic type of issues, it probably is this.
Okay. If someone in our audience is listening to this podcast and wants to try the prayer of freedom at home using your book's worksheet, what guidelines do you recommend for them?
A best guideline, so the book is set up to be in the entire process with all the instructions. But the most important guideline is when you get to making that list of where you may have violated God's standards, okay? It's important to be thorough. And most of the times, like my daughter, you have to go back to the very beginning. Let me give you just 2 or 3 examples because this will start to clarify. My daughter, when she was 23, this was just a year ago, she came up to me and said, "Dad, would you help me get rid of my night terrors?" And I said, "Sure, that's pretty easy." I said, "How long have you been afraid at night?" I said, "She's night terrors 2 or 3 times a week."
Okay.
And I said, "When was the first time you remember getting afraid?" She said, "I was about 3 or 4 years old watching the TV show Psych with my cousin."
Okay.
So that's probably when that door was open, and it's been bothering her chronically and persistently ever since. So I led her back to that point to simply say, "I confess I was wrong to be afraid, and I break all negative ties with my cousin in case there's some tie there. And I now," you asking about commanding, "I now command in the authority of God, the spirit of fear to leave me." She hadn't had night terror since. Another lady was trying to get rid of her smoking addiction. She tried everything from all kinds of medical stuff, psychiatric stuff, all kinds of over-the-counter products to get rid of addictions, self-will. She even went through what's called deliverance, which is you take, if you've ever seen the Christian ministers casting demons out of people, that type of stuff. She did everything work. 3 packs of cigarettes a day. Then someone like me who understood this process said, "When was the first time you started smoking and who led you into it?" She said, "My babysitter when I was 10 years old." So he said, "Let's start there." And he guided her how to close the spiritual doors from that point. And she left his office a few minutes later, never smoking again. The most important thing as people go through this process is, while I stress in the text, make sure you put down the first time. That first time is really critical because that's usually where the door got open. And if you can go back to the first time and shut that door, then everything clears up in your life that came in through that doorway.
Okay. You were mentioning someone that you helped forgive an abusing partner.
Yeah.
When do you distinguish what forgiveness is not? What are your boundaries that come alongside forgiveness? And then how does that tie into helping people break unhealthy ties?
It's interesting. One of the things that I find, especially with sexual partners, you see this a lot. When you have someone that has been a sexual partner, now they've abused you and they're out of your life, most people say, "I still feel controlled by that person." And that control that they're feeling is actually a spiritual issue that came in because of that relationship. That's why that partner can be no longer in their life, but they're still controlling them. Could even be dead, but it still feels like they're still controlling them because it's happening from the spiritual realm. So the way that you forgive and that you break, okay, there's a forgiveness that's an issue, and there's also a breaking of a spiritual bonding with that person that can also be the conduit for these spiritual entities that bring these issues in your life. Forgiveness is when you release your own bitterness against that person. What forgiveness is actually, it's a healing of your heart by releasing the unforgiveness is a spiritual grip on you where that person is still hurting you and you sever that. You know that you've forgiven someone if they were to come into your presence, or you can imagine the person walking into the room right now. And if your heart doesn't trigger, but your heart is at peace, then that lets you know that you've fully forgiven the person. If your heart is triggered by them, then you're still holding on to something against them. And that means that you haven't really been able to forgive. But forgiveness is a choice, and it's a choice to simply let it go. Okay? Water under the bridge concept. I can't do anything about it. I'm sorry it happened. I don't want it to ever happen again, but I'm just going to let it go in terms of my hurt against that person. I won't forget what that person did, and I'll still be hurt by those actions, but I'm forgiving the person. But how do you handle the trauma that the person did against you? Okay.
Right.
So I want to give a simple explanation because this will help a lot of people to forgive, because forgiveness is a choice, but a lot of times when we've had someone who's hurt us really tremendously, when we look at that person, we look at that person as the hurt that they did. So imagine for a moment, I'm going to use the terms, I'll give you the perspective from these addicts because most of them have been abused and molested as an early child. So when they look at the person, it may have been their uncle or their dad or a brother who did that, all they see is the abuse and the molestation that person did against them. And it's hard for them to forgive their dad or their uncle for what they did, because to forgive them in their mind means I'm saying that it was okay what they did to me, and it wasn't okay. So what you have to do is you have to separate the person from the action. This is my uncle, and my uncle molested me. I forgive my uncle, but I don't forgive what he did to me. In other words, I will release my uncle, but that doesn't release that what he did was wrong.
Of course.
So now I can forgive my uncle and release that, the grip on my heart that's been tormenting me. I'll never forget what he did, and I'll still want justice for what he did, but I forgave him as a person. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of us struggle to do that. And what I've come to realize is just what you said. We find ourselves in the grips of darkness, of stress. I don't know what to call it, but by not forgiving that person, it actually affects us more.
It does. And that effect, this is what's interesting. So science has found that holding unforgiveness, let me give you the scientific background on that. When you hold unforgiveness towards someone, it keeps your body in the fight or flight mode. So what that means, your adrenaline goes up and your cortisol production goes up. These are designed to help you fight and win or run away. And it's meant to be short-term. And in short-term increments, your body is fine. But when we hold unforgiveness against someone, that cortisol production stays high, which it does several things. Number one, it reduces your leukocytes, your white blood cell count. So now it makes you susceptible to more sickness. It also causes you to want to eat more carbs, sugars and breads, which are fast energy food, so you can fight or flee. But when you do that and you're not running or fighting, you gain weight, belly fat, and you have higher risk of organ failure.
Right.
Then it decreases your dopamine and one other hormone in your brain, the feel-good hormones, and so now you're depressed. Scientifically, that's what's going on, but then there's a spiritual aspect. If you go to my website, theprayerfreedombook.com, down in the middle section are the live demonstrations, and one of these ladies, she's had neuropathy for 15 years in her legs. On the show, the pain was an 8 on a scale of 0 to 10. I said, has it ever been less than an 8? She said, no, it's always been an 8. And I led her through this process, and I had her ask God, is there something I've done that spiritually that I can reverse that's tied to this neuropathy? And what came across her mind was someone that hurt her 15 years ago that she hadn't forgiven. So I led her into simply forgiving that person, and instantly the neuropathy disappeared. She starts crying. First time in 15 years she's been out of pain. And I said, do you recognize the pattern? 15 years ago, that person hurt you and you held unforgiveness. And for 15 years, you've had neuropathy, and the doctors couldn't figure it out because doctors are looking at mental or physical, but it was actually spiritual.
Yeah.
So that's how that works.
A lot of my listeners are women. They're definitely in their midlives.
Yes.
They're stressed. They're perhaps perimenopausal or menopausal. They're working moms. They can't sleep well. And they often are women who are in the sandwich generation. They're in caregiver mode, and they're taking care of their elderly parents as well as their own families. So what does a 5-minute daily prayer of freedom practice look like for them to help with their stress, with their fears specifically? A lot of my audience may be wondering, why does Dr. Mandal have Beatty Carmichael on the show? How is he helping me?
Yeah.
What do you have to say for that?
Let me tell you a story to back up what I'm going to share. I've been working with a couple named Roger and Laura Ann, and they've had lots of conflict in their marriage, which creates a lot of stress. She calls me up one morning and she says, I need help. So we blew up this morning getting the kids to school, and I'm raging mad. I said, how long have you been raging mad? 4 hours now. And I said, you want to get rid of it? Yes, you can get rid of it in 5 minutes. How do I do that? I said, 3 steps. Number 1, God, I am raging mad. I want to get rid of it. There's stress and anger and these things. If there's a spiritual root, tell me what it is. And the thing that came across her mind is anger and being upset at her husband, Roger. So then she says, I confess that being angry and upset at my husband, Roger, is wrong, and I forgive him, and I release all judgments against him. And then step 3, you command those issues, anger and hurt and stress, out. And so she just said, I command the hurt, anger, and stress to get out of me. And I said, okay, now, how do you feel? She said, I don't feel any of it anymore. So what happens a lot of times is when we get into a situation where stress is normal, but when you got stress, it's real easy to go from just normal stress to a spiritual root that you get angry at somebody, you get upset, and you don't let it go. And now it amplifies that stress and it just drives you. That's what was happening with her. These are, I'll call it a spirit or this dark energy source. Mm-hmm. What it does is it simply amplifies that issue in our life, and you can't let it go, and it just rages on. So that little 5-minute daily prayer you're talking about would simply be to stop and say, wait, hold on. I feel really stressed out and I feel really angry and it's tearing me up. God, what do I need to confess that I did wrong? And then in the authority of God, you say in God's authority, because now you're speaking to a third-party entity, that entity of spirit of anger, let's say. What you'll find is it comes down. That's a short version of how the bigger picture of the prayer of freedom works. What I find is when you're dealing with a lot of issues in your life, many of those issues actually have a spiritual root because of other issues that you've not dealt with in the past. And so it's just all kind of bubbling up. So if you go through the prayer of freedom, what I'm finding with women especially, because they seem to be more emotional in certain areas than men are. Men will blow up and then they'll just put it out of their mind. But women, everything's always on the surface and they can't compartmentalize it as easy as guys do. And by addressing these things, you can get most of that stuff out of your life, which means now when you're in these stressful situations, you're not as stressed. That same couple, Roger and Laura Ann, when they moved, they had a lot of stress points. They never blew up, but their normal tendency would have been blowing up all the time. Because they'd gone through this, they had really difficult stress points, and they were amazed that they didn't blow up. In fact, if you go to my website, theprayerfreedombook.com, at the bottom, I have a number of video testimonials, and you'll see Roger and Laura Ann talking about how this process has just calmed their marriage down. And even to going through that move, they're describing this move, and you didn't blow up. What happens is when you get this stuff out of your life, these points of blowing up in stress and anger, they quiet down. That's how this works.
What about some of my listeners who may not be religious? What if they're skeptical and said, I don't necessarily subscribe to any particular religion. How is this going to help me? What would you say to them if they're skeptical and they don't necessarily follow any particular religion?
Most of the people, first off, this is not a religious approach. It is a prayer approach, but not religion.
Yes.
The difference is religion is based on rules that man has created about their version of who God is. But most people will acknowledge there's a spiritual side of us, and there are very spiritual people that are not religious. This is not religious. It's simply tapping into the spiritual laws that are there. If you open a door, something's going to come in. If you shut the door, it goes out. So it's a cause and effect. Let me explain this.
Okay.
For the audio listeners, I'll explain what I'm doing. I'm holding up my pen right now, and I'm going to let it go. And when I let it go, it's going to drop into my palm. Every time I lift it up and let it go, it drops. So now I can determine that there is a law that I cannot see, and it's called the law of gravity, and I determine it through empirical data, a scientific approach. Same thing with the prayer of freedom. I can guide 100 people through the same process of how do you handle any issue in your life. And 90% of them get this identical result. That issue disappears. And so I can now prove through empirical data that there are spiritual laws that this process works on. and it has nothing to do with your religious beliefs. I've seen it work with Hindu, Muslim, atheist, spiritual but not religious, Jewish, Christian, because it's a spiritual law. It's not a religious, man-made approach.
Yeah, people in my audience might be wondering if they're not of a particular religion, would this apply to them? And I think I already knew the answer, but I wanted to clarify that.
One of the biggest things here also about skeptics is I've come across a lot of skeptics, but when I say just try it, they're no longer skeptics.
Okay. Beatty, can you guide us through a micro exercise right now for the audience?
I can.
Okay.
Can I use you to
Of course.
play it? Okay.
Yes.
So let me ask you now, I can only if you have something that will work. Do
Okay.
you have anything in your life that you can measure right now? Like your left eye doesn't work because you have glaucoma, or you're dealing with anxiety or depression, or you have a pain in your back, or you have eczema somewhere and it's always itching. Do you have anything that you can measure personally?
Yes. Yes, I
Okay.
do. Okay. Do you want me to tell you or?
Yeah, why don't you
Okay.
tell me?
So some upper back pain.
Upper back pain. Okay,
Yes.
perfect. And how long have you been dealing with that upper back pain?
Oh, it's forever. And it's definitely stress induced.
Okay, that's what you say. I think it's going to
Okay.
be spiritual induced. The fact that you're bringing it up on this call makes me believe that it's going to disappear, which shows that it's spiritual, not physical, nor mental. Stress is mental. Spiritual is something different. On a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being worst, what level of pain would you give it right now as you test it out and check it out?
Not very high, but I would give it like a 4.
Perfect. Okay, great. So now I'm going to lead you in 3 steps. First, we're going to ask God, whatever your version of God is, okay, to reveal if there's anything that you've done that you need to confess that was wrong, or someone that you need to forgive.
Okay.
Then step number 2, I'm going to guide you in the words to use to close that door. Step number 3, we're going to command it to leave, and it's going to leave.
Okay.
90% chance. So just follow me on this quick prayer.
Dear God,
I want to get rid of my back pain.
I want to get rid of my back pain.
If there's a spiritual root to it,
If there's a spiritual root to it,
remind me what I need to confess that I did wrong,
remind me what I need to confess that I did wrong,
or the person I need to forgive.
or the person I need to forgive. That's tied to it.
All right. And now, does anything come across your mind?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So now, if it's something that you did wrong, then it's going to be, I confess I was wrong when I did blank. If we want to use a biblical term, because with America, you have Judaism, Christianity, and Muslim. It's all based on the biblical word of sin and repentance. So you could just say, I repent of blank. It's the same thing as saying, I confess I was wrong.
Okay.
And if it's someone to forgive, then whether you have the emotional desire to forgive them, like you're emotionally ready to forgive or not, makes no difference. Just simply say, I forgive blank.
Okay.
I repent of blank. I forgive blank.
Yeah.
And for the audio listeners, hopefully you haven't hung up on us yet. All right, now, did any of that include another person?
Yes.
Okay, great. So now we're going to sever any spiritual negative connections. I'm going to call it an unholy soul tie. Okay. And I break all unholy soul ties with,
I break all unholy ties with,
and I release all judgments against
and I release all judgments against
those people. Okay, so that's step 2. Now, step 3, we're going to ask God to remove it, and then we're going to command it out.
Okay.
And now, God,
I ask that you remove my back pain and take it to a 0. And now, in the authority of God,
I command my back pain to leave.
and I command my back pain to relieve.
Go now.
Go now.
Go to a 0.
Go to a 0.
All right. So now check it out. It was a 4. And tell me, is it still a 4 or is it shifted?
Definitely shifted.
Okay. Give me the number, new number.
It's like a 1.
Perfect. Okay. So now
Yes.
we're going to repeat the 3rd step again. Thank you, God, for reducing it to a 1.
Thank you, God, for reducing it to a 1.
I ask that you take it to a 0.
I ask that you take it to a 0.
Back pain, get out.
Back pain, get out.
Go to a 0.
Go to a 0.
Now check it out.
Gone.
Does that surprise you?
No, not really.
How long have you had
it? It's been forever.
forever?
Yeah.
Have you tried other therapies to try to get rid of it?
Yes.
And none of it worked?
It worked temporarily.
Temporarily, and then it
Yes.
came back. Okay.
Yes.
By the way, this is a demonstration purpose. Sometimes it's not permanent because there are things in the spiritual realm that can affect it. When you go through my book and the process in that one chapter, it will make it permanent. It won't come back if you do it right. But let me ask you, is what you confessed in step number 2, was that forgiving somebody?
Yes.
Almost every time when someone's had a pain that only bothers them, but it doesn't impact anyone else, it's almost always unforgiveness. And so what's happening, okay, if we look at this at a broader picture and try to understand what's going on, as a parent, when one of my children disobeys me, I'm going to discipline them by making life uncomfortable for them in some way. I'm going to take away a privilege. I'm going to put them in timeout. And I'm using that to train them that they need to understand where these rules are, okay, and obey them. And it almost seems like the same thing happens with us. We're supposed to forgive. And when we don't forgive, then we get this something in our life, this pain or deaf ears or blind eyes or whatever it is. It doesn't bother anyone else, but it takes away our quality of life, waiting for us to obey. Once we forgive, do it. There's a lot of little things I did in there that you may not understand. But when you forgive, there's usually like 3 different things you have to do to close all the doors. Then when you do that, the pain goes away and you go, oh, I wish I knew this 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's how it works. It works with pain, anxiety, depression, addictions, conflicts.
Can this also work alongside traditional medical therapeutic plans?
Absolutely. So if you think about this, if I have a sinus infection, it doesn't mean I can't go to the psychologist or the psychiatrist for my other issues, but they aren't going to help my sinus infection. It's only the internist who understands how to get rid of it. He's going to give me a Z-Pack and it's going to go. Okay. If I break my arm, the internist isn't going to help. I need to go to the orthopedic guy. If I'm dealing with just a lot of stress in my family life, maybe I go to the psychologist, but my orthopedic isn't going to help me at all. Same thing here. You're dealing with that. You can still go to the doctor for issues, but if it's a spiritual issue, the doctor won't be able to fix it. Only a spiritual therapy can. And so you choose the doctor that you go to based on the type of therapy you need to get rid of that. And this is simply the spiritual side.
Okay. I've learned a lot from you, and I can't wait to read your book and go through it because I think it would help not just my audience, but myself in many ways, things that I've held on to and probably manifest within my body and my mind that I think you would be able to help me. Let's play some fun questions. If there was a single sentence you wish any anxious person could hear, what would it be?
There is still hope. Try the spiritual route because that's usually where it lies.
Okay. And a habit that most reliably restores your peace in under 5 minutes.
Repent. Repentance every day keeps the torments away. So that's the saying that I would use.
Okay. Finish this sentence for me. Freedom feels like blank.
Freedom feels like abundance.
This has been a great talk. I'll be honest with you. I thought, like, how will this connect to what I do and who my audience is? And I see it very clearly now, where they can definitely benefit from what you're, not just what you've said on the podcast, but from your book.
And I'd like to share one other thing.
Yes.
If you master this approach by really understanding it, by the way, as you go through my book, I also have a master class that you can go through. You can even use this in your medical practice because, just like my father-in-law, it's either mental, physical, or spiritual. And you can quickly identify, in most cases, using the little approach that I just did with you. If it's spiritual, it can be a very quick recovery. As you're dealing with patients and they're coming in, they got these issues all along, or you can't figure out, I don't know what's going on. I've run every test and I can't figure it out. It's often can be spiritual and you can actually help them there that way.
Yeah.
A lot of times there are people that are dealing with things and they've given up hope. It may be a constant relationship conflict with their loved one or their spouse or their partner. And there's just, they've given up hope, or maybe a wayward child and there's a break in the relationship or pain or whatever. And I just want to encourage your listeners If there's anything like that with you or a loved one that you've almost given up hope that there could be any solution, let me encourage you on the prayer of freedom that it may actually be the solution, because I've seen it do things that people have given up hope on, because not all prayers are the same, right? You have to know what you're doing. And so far with this book, I'm measuring statistically 87% everything being disappeared. But when you look at any individual item, it's much closer to nearly 100% success rate on an individual item, especially these little things that we've been talking about here. Be encouraged, try it, because it may just be what you've been looking for and praying for all along, and now is the right process at the right time.
If my audience were to look for your book, find you on social media, your website, where would they go?
Most important website is going to be theprayerfreedombook.com. It has all my information there. And you can get the book on Amazon, but because prayer and freedom are really high SEO type of words, you may miss the right book.
Okay.
But if you go to theprayerfreedombook.com, you'll be sure to get the direct link to Amazon. And then I have a website, beattycarmichael.com. That's what I do for my teaching and show and for live events, or just wants to reach out to me personally.
Awesome.
Great. I've loved being here, and thank you for the invite.
This was a great discussion.